Kia ora, welcome to Parliament TV. Over the next hour, we present items from the TVNZ collection, from archives held by Ngā Taonga Sound and Vision, to remember the politics from our past.
In the lead-up to the 1975 general election, journalist Murray McLaughlin accompanied Prime Minister Bill Rowling and Leader of the Opposition Robert Muldoon on their campaigns. This story was broadcast on the Tonight at 9 programme on the 17th of November 1975.
We are getting ahead of time for Westport at 1-8, and we're leaving 1-1000 at time, sending 8
Cover to 1537 Westwood, Roger.
Barry?
Hello, Mr.
Hello, Barry.
Barry.
Rob, how's the
Good
leader?
to see you. How's it going?
Good.
The dread of any camera crew are smart comments from the sideline, which destroy the sound sequence of an item. West Coast National candidate Barry Dallas takes the prize this day, as if Rob Muldoon never knows when there's a TV camera about.
Well,
We'd better not say too much, Ron. Camera. Get that, Brian.
I'm here.
They bought the biggest, blackest limousine in Westport to whistle Muldoon to his meeting. But leaders of the opposition like to make up their own minds. He chose white.
You come with Harry Lemon. Oh, I see. Oh, well, we're in here now, George. We're in here now, so carry on. We'll go in to the hotel. All right. Will you the car from the hotel or what? Righto.
West Coast Community Radio News. And here's Jim Breeze.
The Leader of the Opposition, Mr Rob Muldoon, is scheduled to arrive in Westport in about half an hour, and soon afterwards he'll address a public meeting in Westport's community centre. From Westport, weather permitting, Mr Muldoon...
The local mayor usually chairs political meetings, but not so for Muldoon's flit to Westport. The trots in Christchurch that day seemed more appealing to the mayor and his deputy. So at the last minute, they had to haul in a rep from the county council to do the job.
I was in Hastings last night and I had one of the 4 or 5 best political meetings that I've had in all the time that I've been in politics.
The man's a curiosity. I mean, he's been doing, the big travelling roadshow over the last 8-9 months. And he's dragging them out just, and not just a party old faithful either. I think there's quite a lot of people just turning up curious, want to know what he's on about. Possibly what the National Party's on about, but particularly what he's on about.
There was a tremendous amount of interest. The big town hall there was chock-a-block full, 3 floors.
Muldoon, his meetings are much more exciting than Mr Rowling's because there's a sort of a psychic quality to them. You never know when he's going to go over the edge. And you're sitting there nervously all night waiting for him to insult someone really seriously.
And I've nothing but contempt for a man that would make a statement like that.
He went on to woo the hearts and minds of Reefton, and here the old numbers game was played. Muldoon claimed to have had half the town turn out to see him, but didn't add that he took advantage of dropping into the middle of a school gala.
You'll be back, won't you? I hope to be back. How do we get in?
Stand up for a moment. Stand up, turn around, face the audience. Come on, stand up and face the audience. Supporter of some other party, and he hasn't said which yet.
Hecklers are Muldoon's delight. His style by now, both well-known, well-developed and hard.
Extraordinary creature, isn't he?
He's a bit like Mick Jagger. He works on him and whips him up and keeps him going, but he makes one bad mistake, I feel, is that he enjoys interjectors very much. In fact, his speeches would be as quiet and as... dull is not the right word, but as slow as Mr Rowling's if he had no interjectors at all. And he works off them and feeds off them, but he does one thing wrong. He crushes them too early. He usually starts off and he goes out with a mad rush and bam, and you're sitting and you're all excited and you're taking things down furiously and whipping these guys in and smashing them into the ground. Everyone's cheering like mad. And gradually the guys stop interjecting. And eventually, because he gets no stimulus from interjectors, he slows down himself. And the last 20 minutes of a Muldoon meeting can be very, very slow. He's sort of burnt the audience off, and he goes quite soggy.
Never mind, you've got to have one or two of them in any community.
They just turn him on. They bring out the adrenaline and away he goes. He's superb with hecklers. This is the thing that's really... If the Labor people think they're going to disrupt a meeting by putting in a heckler or two, they're dreaming. They might as well give him a spike right up the arm with a shot of adrenaline.
Never mind, these are people.
If he could keep the interjections going all night, he could score off them all night. But when he puts them down so quickly and so savagely early on, they just pull their head in and sit there quietly. And then he's left like he's like a diabetic without insulin, where he doesn't have an interjectors.
Well, Mr. Muldoon,
Yeah.
I've seen you. How do you do?
After meetings, Mr. Muldoon fades from the scene as quickly as possible. He doesn't bother to mingle much with the crowd. In fact, he has to be cajoled, here in Greymouth of all places, into doing a stint of socialising for our camera.
He's right into being at full speed ahead for those meetings. And he's not into socialising with the faithful afterwards. Okay, sure, he's not rude to anybody. Shakes a few hands on the way out and says hello to this one or that one, and, you know. But he's not going out of his way to charm people. He just wants to get home, have a quick snack to his hotel or wherever he is, and into bed, 10:15, 10:30, get a good night's sleep. He normally gets by on about 4 or 5 hours sleep, and he's using up a lot of sleeping time this trip so he can be right for the next day.
You've got no hair to lose.
I think they put that through the old computer down at National Party headquarters, and they've worked out that there's just no future in mixing with the people. And so he comes off the stage, shakes a few hands, back into the motel, and works on his speeches for the next night. Has a quick meal before it clots.
Good idea.
But it's nigh impossible to get genuine candid stuff in a situation like this. It suddenly becomes stilted and artificial.
The answers before.
Shortly after our camera started, the local National Party affiliates thought it would look good to have Rob chatting to a younger age group. So they whistled across a couple of earnest young Nat supporters to chat with their leader, and the tone of the conversation reinforced the jack-up.
I think that's what people are wanting this time. They're sick of promises.
Church and kids I don't feel like, after only a few hours away from boozing at one of Greymouth's many late-running pubs.
Open your ears, oh Christian people.
Rob's been invited here by the vicar to talk specially to the kids, but it all seems a little above them.
Royal priesthood, God has come to you. God has come to you.
The family service tells us all that the family is the basic unit of our society, and it's a unit and a concept that we've got to preserve if we are going to have a stable society. Say what you think, and if somebody doesn't like it, all right, they vote for the other side.
The National Party accused me of flogging their banner after this meeting. That was the last thing I wanted.
Promises, pie crust promises.
Our fourth public meeting in 24 hours. So perhaps it's understandable that a young fella, unaccustomed to West Coast endurance drinking, takes a snooze.
Your own mind can't be carried out.
I got caught.
A few moments ago, I think I observed the TV swing their camera around in a certain direction to a person lying asleep. In all probability, it will come over TV too tomorrow. I say now, and I don't care whether it's refuted or not, I don't think he's a West Coaster, and I don't think he's one of ours.
Chief, it's great to be back home. Home is where I want to be. I've been on the road so long, my friend. And if you came along, I know you couldn't disagree. It's the same old story.
4 years' income in 3 years, borrowed the difference, and you and your children will be paying it back for the next generation and beyond. Mr. MRP Freer, 37 sets of price regulations and none of them worked. Beware the Labor Party, especially when they come bearing gifts. I hear words I never heard in the Bible, and I'm so tired. I'm so tired. I'm trying to keep my customers satisfied. You can't govern the country with a gentle smile. You govern the country back there in Parliament buildings with policies, and they didn't have any policies. They didn't have any policies.
Muldoon handles the street corner soapbox as deftly as his nighttime indoor meetings. But there's one disadvantage. He hasn't control over the questions.
Why are you not prepared to say outside the House what you say inside the House? That lady challenged you about that letter, and you won't reply to it outside the House.
Someone down here.
We want that one.
All right, that's it. That's not a difficult one.
That's not Well, we want...
That question did not get answered later, but they do get answered at a rate of knots at his nighttime meetings. Here he accepts written questions only. It enables more questions to be answered more quickly, say the candidates' handlers. Mr. Muldoon says his whistle-stop campaign tactics of the last fortnight are modelled partly on the pattern set by Norman Kirk 3 years ago. But, says Rob Muldoon, with a difference or two.
I think my style is different from Norman Kirk's in that in 1972 he was hammering the National Party and promising to put everything right. I'm not making many promises, and indeed I'm not hammering the Labour Party to any great extent. I'm simply, I think, carefully, quietly, and I hope intelligently exposing their defects. But I'm not declaiming their defects, and I'm not really at this stage conducting a very violent campaign.
$10,000 miles and 80 meetings in 6 weeks. That's the track record to tonight of Prime Minister Bill Rowling. He says he's standing up well to the campaign pace. The Rowling band seems to play along at an easier pace than Muldoon's. Rowling lays big value on the personal touch. Even pushing buttons and cutting ribbons isn't a drag. He seems to like it.
We borrowed against that coming, and we make no apology for the actions that we took. kept the economic base of the New Zealand economy because we have kept it sound, even though there have been difficulties.
Mrs. Rowling, it's very nice indeed having you here. There isn't any need for you to sing, but your smile is sufficient. Now, could I ask everyone here to be good enough, please, to rise and give 3 hearty cheers for our Prime Minister and Mrs. Rowling. Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hooray! Hip, hooray!
Head out on the highway, looking for adventure.
Really what I am trying to do is make maximum contact with people outside the, I think, the rather unnatural environment of the hall meeting. It's necessary, I know, and we've had big meetings, but where you can meet people in their own territory, their own place of work, where they live, I think they're more relaxed. You get a better response.
We can climb so high, I never wanna die.
Meetings are my penance, the PM told me. He says he'll never be an orator, but acknowledges that the big meeting and rally scene are an important campaign ingredient. Glenn Rowling is also concerned about her husband's delivery. She's constantly urging hubby to brush up on his diction. The roadshow of journalists tracking Rowling have also told the PM staff that their boss doesn't come across strong enough. Muldoon, it seems, has it all over Rowling when it comes to heavy oratory.
Ladies and gentlemen, Right Honourable W.E. Rowling, Prime Minister.
I enjoy the other part of the campaigning more. As I said, I think the meeting is just a little bit too formal. It's when you can break away from the formality of politicking and get down to really talking to people that it's a much more satisfactory business all round. It's harder perhaps to talk at them because in a political meeting essentially that's what you're doing. You've got a group of people, several hundred, maybe 1,000 or more sitting there. You are talking at them. But maybe another circumstance where even in half an hour you're among 300 or 400 people and you're essentially talking with them and you get a different reaction. Not all of them can participate in that sort of kind of time, but they feel a greater sense of participation, I believe. In the course of a day you might meet many hundreds of people. We've found that we might have 1,000 people, 1,500 people at a night meeting, but we've possibly seen and talked with, rather than at, just as many people during the day.
There's not the same amount of adrenaline surging through the old arteries when you're covering Rowling. And, well, with Rowling's meetings you get respect and affection from the audience, and it's very gentle and very quiet. With Mr. Muldoon, you virtually only get respect alone. Rowling's waste a lot of time going down chatting to people and shaking hands, and it looks good, and the people enjoy it, but they're party faithful anyway. The fact that Rowling enjoys it and they enjoy it may not mean much outside that particular hall, and it just tires him out possibly. He comes back to the hotel much later than Mr. Muldoon does, and he wastes a lot of time during the day, if you could call it waste, shaking hands and saying hello to people. Mr. Muldoon's people, where I've been, have been very annoyed with the fact they've organised and advertised Meet the People campaigns, and Mr. Muldoon has cancelled them, or if he has gone on them, he's raced through them, and one shopkeeper said, oh, he tore through here at 50 miles an hour. And they sort of went, hi, gone, and that was it.
I just don't see it. We've had government with a majority of one in this country. And we've still been able to observe, I believe, inside that, the wishes of the people. We've been able to conduct government. We've been able to carry through until the time of the next election, albeit with some difficulty, but without any kind of political chaos. And I would think that if precedent is anything, that would be as tight a political situation. Thank you. that would be as tight a political situation as you could possibly imagine.
Have you been in telephone communication with Mr. Whitlam?
No.
Do you intend to?
Not in the immediate situation.
Will you be sending him a telegram of support as one Labour leader tomorrow?
He will naturally enough have my goodwill as he goes into an election campaign.
Would you expect him to do as well as you expect to do here?
I can only say that if he does, he'll be highly delighted.
For the journos tagging the party leaders, entertainment is predictable. A few beers after each night's meeting. Although, a few hours before this breakfast press conference, we'd varied the tempo with readings from a paperback liberated from a locked cabinet in the hotel foyer. The text, carefully chosen erotic passages from The Pirate, Harold Robbins' latest sex endurance novel. But there are a few perks for the Fourth Estate on the campaign trail.
It's a lot of fun, really. Yeah, it is good fun. We're getting a lot of free food and a lot of free grog. There's no groupies. Not even TV1 can pull the groupies. If TV1 can't pull groupies and Rotorua, then how on earth can the press gallery get groupies? It's a sad state of affairs.
Do you think as immigration is emerging now as one of the main issues now?
It's clearly an issue. There's no doubt about it. It's an issue, it's rather interesting because it's an issue after the event.
I disapprove of groupies utterly, and I feel quite pleased for those chaps that they can't get them because I know they're mean people, and I feel quite happy for them, but they're not happy.
Yes, I'll see.
What they shower a lot, often very rapidly. That's
In spite of the pageantry, those bagpipes again, Whangarei was just another ho-hum political affair. We'd been told by the PM's researcher to stand by for some strong stuff on immigration. We rolled on the Q word. But it was about as punchy as a limp pat on the back. The First Lady must have found it pretty drab too. She's been feeling the hectic pace of the campaign, and tonight's speech was a bit too much. Mrs. Rawlings bought a special set of dark glasses for occasions like this. Stage and television lights are a bit harsh, apparently.
Okay, who makes 25 cents worth a dollar? Thursday Magazine does. You're listening to Gordon Dryden's Powerline. Opinions expressed in this program are not necessarily those of Radio I or its advertisers.
If you'd like to ring the Prime Minister, Mr. Rawling, and talk to him, ask him some quick questions, debate with him a couple of major issues that are concerning you, please give us a ring on 78509. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Rawling.
Oh, good morning.
I'd just like to ask you a couple of questions that I'm sure a lot of people are very keen to know the answers to. One of them is, the Labour Party is in power. Why doesn't it govern instead of attacking other members of other parties? We need so much help in so many situations.
Well, I would agree with you if you were talking about some members of Parliament rather than government. I think if you reflect on events over the past year, you will find that government and government members in particular have been getting on with the business of governing, but they have more than once during the course of that year been rather frustrated in that.
A visit to the Auckland waterfront is traditional for a Labour Party leader at election time. And with his suit coat off, the first time we'd seen that, Phil told the fellows that they were still just as important as they thought they were.
I want to also say thank you very much for the very direct support, Mr. President, that your union has offered to the Labour movement. I can tell you that it is appreciated not only by those in the parliamentary caucus, but it is appreciated by the members of the Labour movement throughout the length and breadth of New Zealand.
Rotorua meant smells, another dull meeting, and the end of the trail for me. But I was able to show my objectivity on the sleeping score by snoozing in the orchestra pit, this time unobtrusively. Wakened, though, by the only lively act of the night, the Mayor ponderously laying down the law at question time.
I said I would give one over there, but that expired there one because the first question we asked was over there. I would get 2 to the centre. Now,
And you could not see him because of the light. But believe me, Ray, he was the first man to stand.
will you please resume your seat? You will please obey the chairman. Please. It's highly disorderly to interrupt the chair. Highly disorderly. And then I said, overall, ladies would have preference. That's what I said. That's what I said. And that's what I'm insisting on. Now, the next call goes to the right, and I hope the people at the back will exercise it.
That Tonight at 9 story was broadcast on the 17th November 1975. The National Party won the general election with 55 seats. Labour won 32.
In 1987, psychiatrist Basil James presented a series of interviews with prominent New Zealanders. He spoke with Sir Robert Muldoon about the private aspects of his persona.
Good evening. I'm Basil James, a psychiatrist, and tonight I'm going to talk to Sir Robert Muldoon. Never far from the public eye as a politician, Sir Robert is perhaps too well known to require any real introduction. As a rule, of course, Sir Robert's appearances deal with public issues. Tonight, we address some of the more private aspects of the public person.
One of my earliest memories was going down to Eden Park when I was about 3 with my mother to watch my father refereeing senior rugby. I was an only child. I was born in Auckland in 1921, lived there really all my life. My mother brought me up by working as an upholsteress at home from the time I was about 8, and my father became a permanent invalid. When I was 11, I won a rolling scholarship and went straight from Form 1 to Mount Albert Grammar. For 2 years, I was the smallest and youngest boy in the school, and I took a lot of punishment from older boys who looked on me as something of a curiosity. When I joined the Army at the age of 19, I got the best education that I ever had from people in every walk of life, and really that knowledge of the way the ordinary New Zealander acts under adversity has stood me in good stead in politics. I finished my accounting examinations when I was in the Army. And after I came back, my wife Tam, who was also an accountant, and I met in the Junior National Party, strangely enough, at a debate on compulsory unionism. I was very fortunate because we've worked together as a team ever since. This is a photograph of myself and Bert Walker on the night that I moved the address and reply in my first year in Parliament, and Bert seconded it. That was 1961. It hasn't all been politics, though. Lilies are my favorite flower. We've always had time for family holidays with the kids. They're, of course, grown up now and have their own children. But it's all really been well worthwhile. This was election night 1975.
Sir Robert, you've written that most of us are fascinated by the history of our forebears, and that seems to me a good place to start. Could you tell us about your forebears?
I suppose the best thing I can say is that I appear to have come from blacksmiths on both sides of my family. One side, my mother's side, is English from East Anglia. My father's side, originally from the north of Ireland and from Wales. And just 2 or 3 generations back, there were blacksmiths. I don't know what that means. I suppose reasonably good physique, but not tall.
Your paternal grandfather was, I understand, a Methodist missionary.
Yes, not perhaps in the missionary sense that most people would respond, coming out here to convert the natives and perhaps ending up in an iron pot, that sort of thing. He came out in the 1880s. He wasn't ordained, but he took up the running of a seaman's mission on the Auckland waterfront. He was a lay preacher in the Methodist Church, but he ran the mission for many years. He founded the Wesleyan Young Men's Institute in Auckland, and I think he was, from all the records that I have of him, a typical fire and brimstone preacher, but with a very real dedication to the less fortunate in the community.
On the other side of your family, your maternal grandmother was rather an important person in your life.
Yes, I think she was partly responsible for my keen interest in politics. She came to New Zealand with her husband, I believe in 1886. She used to talk of the Tarawera eruption, which came shortly after they arrived, and they lived in Napier, first of all, where my mother was born. Her husband left her, and I never ever learned the detail of that. It was something that she didn't talk about. She finally brought up her 3 children by doing various types of work, sewing, dressmaking, that kind of thing. And I think fairly successfully, because she was very active in politics. She was a supporter and activist in the time of Richard John Seddon and the Liberal Party. She worked for Arthur Myers, who became Mayor of Auckland and also a Member of Parliament. And she had a reputation, again, for helping the less fortunate. Now, if you can think of what we call today a solo mother with 3, I guess, by then teenage children, spending a lot of time helping the less fortunate, well, that was not as unusual then as perhaps it would be today.
Did you have much contact with her as a child?
She went blind. She died at quite a late age, and she lived with my aunt not very far from where we lived, and I used to go down after school, sit with her and talk. And we used to talk about the old days. We used to talk about all kinds of things. We used to talk about politics. By then she'd changed over to Labour, and I'm talking now of the late 20s and 30s. My wife was still on the other side. My mother was still on the other side of politics. And my grandmother and I used to explore the political situation in great depth. My mother hated Gordon Coates. I say mother, I'm getting really mixed up when I say that, my grandmother. And she was very proud of the fact that when he held a meeting in Mount Albert, she stormed up the center of the hall, stopped him in his tracks by waving her umbrella at him and saying all kinds of fierce things to him. Well, I've since learned to have some admiration for Gordon Coates, having read a great deal more about what he did as a politician. But this was in the early 30s, in the middle of the Depression, when things were pretty tough.
One of the things that must have made things even tougher for you as a child was the episode you referred to earlier, that is your father's illness. That really must have been very tragic. Could you tell me how that affected the family?
Well, I again have to say that my mother's efforts were such that I did not have a deprived childhood. Certainly I was an only child. But we used to grow our own vegetables and our own flowers, and she worked as an upholsteress. Very hard, very long hours. She'd work until late at night, and I'd go to bed, and she'd still be working, sewing things, and we got through. We never starved. I was always well clothed. She made a lot of my clothes. She was a very, very effective woman, and obviously she had a certain amount of help from other people.
Your mother was obviously very devoted. You record in your first book that she never missed a Saturday over 20 years visiting
That's right.
your father.
She used to go to see him every Saturday, and he'd lost the power of speech, but she never missed. And she was terribly devoted to him and to me.
Do you recall that part of your life as a sad time with your father, or was there sadness then?
No, we didn't see it in the term sad. It was something that was part of our life that obviously we deeply regretted. But it's quite remarkable, I think, what you can accustom yourself to. I mean, if you have a severely handicapped child, and I've known many families with handicapped child, you get a tremendous amount of joy of just having that child with you. And you don't all the time think, oh no, he or she is handicapped. It's so-and-so by name who's part of us. And I think that was it.
Could you say a little bit more about your mother? You said she was very loving to you. Could you describe something of your relationship together? Because you were together for a while.
She was what I would call strict. She insisted that I was always clean, bright, and shiny, that I always had clean clothes on, that everything was tidy around the house, that I did what I had to do in the way of helping in the garden, the lawns, and the like. But we had that as something we both understood, and there was no, what shall I say, no friction in it at all. She, I think, I know she was very proud of my, what I suppose I'd call academic success at school. And I was very proud of the way she managed.
You've said that courage and initiative can be transmitted from one generation to another. Do you recognize any qualities in yourself that have come from your family?
I'm not an introspective person, but I learned a lot from both my grandmother and my mother. And some of those things are things I believe in.
You mentioned, Sir Robert, that your mother was very pleased with your success at school. Do you think in any way that your future role was cast through the expectations and wishes of others?
That's a difficult question to answer in the way that you put it, because I guess when I was a teenager, both believed that I'd become an accountant professionally, because my father had been in that profession, and my mother's brother was a successful accountant in industry. And I never really thought of being anything else.
Could we move to your school years?
Yes.
And you mentioned the Rawling Scholarship. You'd mentioned also that you were good at mechanical things.
Yes.
What did you mean by that?
Well, from the very early stages in primary school, the mechanical subjects, arithmetic, spelling, being two examples, I would get 100% every day. Those were things that are either right or wrong. They're simple, they're mechanical, they're logical. 100% every day. But then, because I was a voracious reader, I became totally immersed in the English language and all the things that you can do with it. Reasonably interested in the science subjects, but English was my first love, and even though I was very young, I topped the class in English right through secondary school.
I don't think anybody would ever call you a mechanical person. And I just wonder how you find expression for your creativity.
Well, you say that, but I am, in some ways, a mechanical person. in that I believe I've always developed a logical approach to problems. I do believe that you can build on that rather simple logical approach and still look into the future and say, well, now where do we go from here?
How do lilies fit into that?
Lilies fit into it, I think, in quite a different way. That we were very, very keen gardeners, my mother and I, and not just the vegetables in the back garden, but the flowers in the front garden. And that's where I got my love of flowers and flower growing. And when I got married, much later, I had a very fine garden in our home. And I became interested as a hobby in growing rare plants from seed. I can't tell you quite how I got into that, but I did. And then I found that you can grow some beautiful hybrid lilies from seed. And I got into lilies that way.
Lily growing is more than an intellectual exercise. It has to do with beauty.
Yes, indeed. And I think perhaps the thing that I've learned in my gardening is that there's something very satisfying in seeing something grow of itself. In other words, do what you know has to be done to give it the right conditions, and then it grows, and you get a tremendous amount of satisfaction out of seeing that happen.
Any parallel in politics?
Yes, there is, really. There is. Sometimes you get a few weeds and pests and diseases. But I think one does get a tremendous amount of satisfaction from political activity, because you see things that happen that are good things, and you say, had I not done so-and-so, that would not have happened.
Do you remember, Sir Robert, writing the phrase, "The house is a human place"? You put it in large capitals in your book. I wonder if you could expand on that.
Well, I don't recall precisely the circumstances, but I know I would have written it. If you quote from one of my books, it's something I would have said. There are, I think, ways in which you can make your case by bouncing ideas off selected people on the other side, getting the response that you're fairly confident you will get, and having thought ahead one step, as I guess you do in chess, several moves ahead, say, yes, that's right, and that, of course, means so-and-so and so-and-so. The human bit is where you see the other person realize that he's said exactly the thing you wanted him to say.
I recall the phrase, the house is a human place, in relation particularly to your observation about politicians who have lost their seat to another person and get into the house through another election.
Yes, we've seen many cases of that. Well, I have noticed many cases that a man comes in his first term in a marginal seat. He loses because it wasn't really a seat that his party should have had anyway. He comes back in a safer seat and he stays in for a long time. His target is the man who beat him, because he's saying to himself, I never should have lost to that fellow. And the best example, and I know he won't mind me mentioning it, the best example, because it goes back a long way rather than current politics, was when the late Tom Heyman beat Arnold Nordmeyer in the Oamaru seat. It's gone under different names. And even when I came into the House years later, in 1960, Arnold Nordmeyer, who's a remarkable man and a fine man, he could never resist taking a chop at Tom Heyman, who was at that time a minister, and for some time, up until his death, Minister of Agriculture. But Arnold Nordmeyer, he had to have a chop at Tom Heyman, and among the very few unkind things I ever heard him do was mimic a mispronunciation by Tom Heyman. But it's this thing, he beat me, and he's really not as good as I am. And I've seen a number of them do it. I suppose you could say, although it's at a slightly different level, that I've made a close study of the present Prime Minister who beat me in 1984, not in my electorate.
Right. Well, of course, he's not on the couch tonight, Sir Robert.
Quite. But I'm giving you, if you like, a story against myself.
Right.
But I haven't been beaten after holding a seat, so the other type of story doesn't apply to me, but I think perhaps that one does.
Yes. You described yourself, Sir Robert, as somebody who never starts an argument as a counterpuncher, that you may return the punch with a little more heft in it than the original blow. Do you think that's true now? What you wrote that a little while ago.
It's always been a habit of mine. Yes, I think so. And there's a reason for it. The reason is that you have, in our type of politics, so many clashes that you really don't need to go and start them. They will start. I think another reason, perhaps, is that I've normally been on the government side. And the government is the target for the opposition rather than the opposite way around. Not totally, but to some considerable extent.
I recall reading about two incidents that seemed to have incensed you particularly. One involved what you referred to as a disparagement of your wife, and the other seemed to you to be an insult politically to your mother, in a book.
Yes, two. The first one was a very new member who's still in the House, and he's now been there for 20 years, and this would be way back in about 1967. Someone from the newspaper spoke to my wife and asked her about an increase in the cost of living. And she said, well, yes, curiously enough, we've just taken in a stray cat a few weeks ago. And I was astonished at the price of cat food when I went to buy some. It was much more than I expected, and this chap in the House who'd read this in the newspaper, I think probably unwittingly, said, and there the Minister of Finance's wife has more interest in the price of cat food for a cat than she has in the people who are starving, this kind of thing. That wasn't precise words, but that's what it was. And I was so angry that I went across the floor of the House and I flourished my fist under his nose and I said, you say anything like that again and I'll hit you. And he happened to sit next to Richie MacDonald, who was a long-serving Labour member for Ponsonby. He was a chap that I got on very, very well with. We were good friends, although there was a great age difference. And he said to me afterwards, Rob, I didn't move an eyelid in case you hit me.
Do you think you might have?
No, I wouldn't have hit the other chap. The other one was really, I think, quite unfair, and that was the member, quite a senior member, who was the member for the district in which we lived, and he told a journalist who was writing a book about me that my mother was in fact a Labour Party supporter, and various things of that kind. He had met her once at the opening of a bowling club, and I can remember what she said to me. She said, I met Mr. So-and-so for the first time at a bowling club opening, and he wasn't as bad as I thought he would be. But she was a fierce protagonist for whatever the opposition party to Labour was, and it had different names over the years, finally the National Party. And she was dead by the time he said this, of course, and she would have been highly incensed at this. I don't know whether it's his memory or he was just trying to be clever, but I didn't see it so much as an insult. I'm not sure that was exactly the correct term. I just felt that she would have been terribly upset.
Just sticking with human relations, Sir Robert, and if I could quote you again, You said you believe that it is human relationships that lie at the root of most of the hardships in this country today.
Human relationships. Not sure where I said precisely that.
You were referring to the value of families.
Yes. It is human relationships, but let me put it this way. I think the biggest single social and economic problem that we have in this country, and we very seldom hear it put this way, is the difference between the one-income family and the two-income family. Are we going to continue to have the traditional family with the wife at home looking after the children while the husband earns a salary adequate to keep them at a good normal standard of living? Or are we going to have this pressure remaining for the wife to be earning some kind of an income as well? And the next step beyond that, which complicates the same problem, is the high degree of broken marriages, some indeed coming from this very question. And then you get the next stage of it, of the solo parent.
Sir Robert, I wonder if I could ask you just for a brief response to one more of your quotations. You said that, "I've come to realize that the sharp and logical mind is but one segment of the circle that makes for the whole man." What other qualities do you admire in people?
Compassion, obviously, and the ability to relax and say the single-minded pursuit of whatever my ambition fastens on is an inadequate goal. There must be more than that. I don't know whether that's a sign of advancing age, but I've always held these views to some considerable extent.
It might embarrass you, Sir Robert, if I asked you if you could tell me what your best qualities are. Can I ask
Mine?
you? Yes.
Oh, it wouldn't. Well, it wouldn't embarrass me. I guess after all these years in politics, I'm impossible to embarrass, but it would be a difficult question because I am not an introspective person in the sense that that question requires. What are my best qualities?
Well, the other side of the question, and it may still be that you're
Yes.
not introspective enough to respond. Are you aware of any flaws that you wish you didn't have?
Again, as a politician who lives in a goldfish bowl, I think it's quite difficult and not in any way productive to admit to flaws. Politics is a cruel game. And if I were to admit to flaws, inside a month in the House, someone would say, "Oh, he's so-and-so, he admits it himself." Well, I wouldn't give them that satisfaction.
Sir Robert, I wonder if I could attempt a summary of our discussion.
Yes.
I'd like to start again with the quotation that we used earlier, that courage and initiative are transmitted from one
Yes.
generation to another. And even if a script was not written for you, so to speak, by your family, it seems to me that these are things that you have inherited from your mother, particularly your grandmother. There seems to be something, perhaps also, of the missionary. Certainly the politician from your grandmother.
Yes.
And the circumstances that occurred later in your childhood seem to me to be ones in which the family could either have sunk or survived. And they survived. And your mother in particular seems a fine example of what one individual person can do against the odds. I would guess that there were very intense and loving bonds within that family group, and I think I would include in that your grandmother. And I think I understand the origin of your statement. Loyalty is the first essential. I think we've discovered in the course of our talk many of your virtues. You've been a bit reticent about your flaws, and I think that's survival of a different kind, and I think that's fair enough. Sir Robert, thank you very much.
You're right.
That interview with Sir Robert Muldoon was broadcast on the 6th of February 1987.
Welcome to POC. It's the Presiding Officers and Clerks Conference. It's the 49th. It is for the Pacific and Australia. When you're a speaker or a clerk, it's a bit like being a referee. It's a pretty lonely job. And one of the ways that we get support is to meet with other speakers from around the Pacific and around Australia.
So many of our parliaments in this part of the world are small parliaments representing small populations. So to have the chance to come to a conference, exchange ideas, hear different perspectives, take ideas home, which could be adapted or modified for the home context, that's very, very important through a conference like this.
It's an invaluable experience because there are very few places you can go where you have only your peers who genuinely understand the role that we undertake.
Parliament plays a very important role, and for us to be coming together and we have these exchanges, it's good to meet.
It sort of brings together the family that represents parliaments right across the Pacific and Australia.
One highlight from this conference that I would like to take back would be making Parliament family friendly. I think that's a very positive outlook for women.
Parliaments need to look like the society that they're representing. That means we need to move towards gender parity. To get there, we're going to have much more family-friendly parliaments, and I applaud the initiatives that our Speaker, Trevor Mallard, has underway to push that.
I really admire the family-friendly, allowing the women to bring their children.
There are several things that I would like to take back to my parliament. First and foremost is the sharing of information from the Pacific parliaments, including Australia and New Zealand.
To have those long-term relationships with people in traditional areas and also remote areas, it's of high importance that you gain trust.
I thought it was an opportunity. I spoke to thank the New Zealand government because they reached out to us.
We're looking forward to working together to improve our parliament on what we are lacking.
Feeling like we belong. And we know that if we belong, we can succeed.
We've had a fantastic 3 days where people, I think, have shared some really interesting experiences and ideas, and it's been a real pleasure to host this 49th conference.
Te Whare Paramata, the People's House belongs to you, and now you can check it out on virtual reality.
Really cool. I was absolutely blown away. I can't wait to share the opportunity with kids at my school in Christchurch East.
To put on that headset and to be able to have a look around, you feel as if you are actually there, taking part.
Fun, amazing, and I think young people will grasp the technology and it will help communicate what we actually do here in Parliament.
And I hope stimulate them one day not only to come to Parliament, but perhaps to think about standing for Parliament as well.
I'm looking forward to taking them around to my North Shore schools. I think the colleges, but I also think the intermediate kids would love these.
I'm thinking about schools, of course, but old people's homes, just my neighbours.
It is called virtual reality for a reason, because it's actually like being here. I really loved it. Kia ora.
For some contemporary insights into the workings of Parliament, you can view a collection of short videos from the Spotlight on Parliament series. Just head to the New Zealand Parliament website at www.parliament.nz.